Hey everyone, today on Big L Books I'm here to do an April wrap-up, and yes, I am well aware that we are over halfway through the month of May. I hope that BookTube will forgive me for my transgressions, since, time and months are sort of arbitrary, right? We don't need to bind ourselves to those constructions, do we? Of course not. So I had a pretty cool reading month, and the books that I read this month got to take me to places real and imagined all over the world, which is great. I mean, that's why I like reading. So throughout this video, we're going to talk about books that took me to Stockholm, Sweden during the punk craze in the 70s. We are going to go to Russia in the past and Russia's imagined future in a post-apocalyptic society. I got to visit a fictional African state that was very fantastical. I even got to leave the planet for another universe when I started reading Saga. So it was a pretty wild reading month, but the book that we're going to talk about first is one that was written during the Renaissance, and that is My Life, the autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini. I went into this book knowing next to nothing about Benvenuto Cellini, who was an Italian artist that lived during the Renaissance and was most famous for creating this statue of Perseus. So this is not a book that I would have picked up on my own, but I have a very ambitious group of students that wanted to select this as a memoir to read for their literature circle groups. So I thought, okay, if my students are going to read it, I should probably read it too. And I was not looking forward to it. This is about 460 pages of tiny type and full of thorough endnotes, and I did not think I was in the right headspace for this, but I gotta tell you, I was so pleasantly surprised by this book. It was so exciting, engaging, and absolutely batshit crazy. Though this book can teach you a lot about Italian art, history, culture, and politics, I'm gonna be honest, that was fine, but I was really here for the drama, because Benvenuto is just a wild, passionate man. He gets in a fight almost every other page. He flat out murders people in this book, and he's also a compulsive liar, so he puts quite the spin on his stories, and he knows how to tell a good tale. I'm going to share some of the things I jotted down while reading this book, and this only covers like a brief 20-page span of the book, which will show you just how chock full of craziness this thing is. So here we go. Benvenuto Cellini continues to be ridiculous. Where do I begin? The rage and fights continue. Whichever one of you leaves his shop, the other will go fetch his confessor, because there will be no need for a doctor. Claims that he is somewhat hot-blooded by nature. Attacks a weaponized gang of 12 on the next page. Confronting him, I asked him if he was that impertinent man who was speaking ill of Florentines. He immediately replied, "I am that man." Upon hearing his words, I raised my hand and gave him a slap in the face, saying, "And I am this man." Then we have some more bragging going on. I also made with my own hands the finest gunpowder, discovering the most wonderful secrets that no one else has discovered even to this very day. And then he also feels noble for not sleeping with his buddy's girlfriend, but instead decides to take a 12-year-old girl's virginity and almost dies of syphilis. Then goes to a party and dresses up a young guy in drag. Homoerotic undertones abound. So as you can see, this is a book that is full of action and adventure and ridiculous commentary. Benvenuto Cellini is one of those people that you would never like to meet in real life because they would be insufferable, but he is someone that I had a lot of fun spending time with in a narrator setting because he made quite the epic tale out of his life, and I had a lot of fun reading it, which I was not expecting. While reading Benvenuto, I was also working my way through another wild and long read. That was Wizard of the Crow by Ngūgī wa Thiong'o. This book was on my 2018 TBR, and I had such high hopes for this book. I really thought that I was going to love it, especially since it has comparisons to some of my favorite books of all time, like The Master and Margarita and Midnight's Children, and I'm happy to report back that this book did not let me down. I truly loved reading this book. This book is set in a fictional African country called the Free Republic of Abruria, but of course that's not exactly what this country is, as it is led by a pretty pretty despotic ruler who we learn from the beginning of the book has some kind of mysterious illness that we later find out is pregnancy, but we don't know exactly what this ruler is going to be giving birth to. So as you can see, there are some kind of magical realism vibes. There is a lot of satire. The book is very critical and making fun of these African dictatorships and the way that they're basically doing what European powers want them to be doing. So he's critical about this modern globalization movement, and he links it to previous systems like slavery and colonization as essentially the same old relationship where Europe tells Africa exactly what they want it to do, except in this, the African government kind of has this illusion of power. A lot of the time, this book is just straight up roasting the dictator and the ridiculous group of officials that are just madly scrambling for power. But there is also a tale of uprising and resistance at the heart of this text through the two main characters, Nyawira and Kamiti, who come together, form this romantic relationship, and also pretend to be the Wizard of the Crow, who is this pseudo-magical person who apparently has healing powers and ends up influencing a lot of the events that are happening in this book. This book really has it all going for it. There are carefully crafted, compelling characters, absurd moments of satire that are absolutely hilarious, and there are these larger statements about the state of contemporary African politics. So there is so much to love about this book, and if you're put off by the length, as it is 760 pages long, I can tell you that it is just such a pleasant read throughout the whole book. Thiong'o is such a great storyteller. He really carries you smoothly through all the turbulence of this wild story. So I couldn't recommend this highly enough. I really enjoyed this book, and I would be surprised if this doesn't end up on one of my favorite books of the year list. After reading a great book, I then went and read a terrible book, which was Shelter in Place by Alexander Maksik. So this was a book that I knew nothing about, but saw in the used bookstore. It was a nice little Europa edition. I saw that it was set in the Pacific Northwest, which is a part of the world that has a place in my heart. And the opening sentence was intriguing. It goes like this. In the summer of 1991, my mother beat a man to death with a 22-ounce Estwing framing hammer, and I fell in love with Tess Wolfe. So I thought, okay, there could be a story here, but I am sad to report back to you that the opening line is as good as this book gets. I knew from quite early on that I was going to hate this book. The main character is a douchebag, but he's one of those really introspective ones, and he writes in clipped sentences with lots of rhetorical questions, and I just did not care about the scenes set in the present or the past. But I decided to continue on reading since I had this really strong book hangover after finishing Wizard of the Crow. So I thought, whatever, I'll just read something trashy and garbage and I don't know, that will make me feel better or something. So I did read this all the way through, hating it most of the time. There was a manic pixie dream girl who was all wild. This guy's mother, like it mentions in the first sentence, beats someone to death in a parking lot in front of his family with a hammer, but she's also propped up as this kind of feminist hero because apparently this guy was like abusing his wife. So, you know, it was trying to take this feminist stance, like, what do you do when the law cannot protect you? But it really didn't go anywhere with that. And it was just kind of uncomfortable trying to read about this man trying to like embrace feminist values, but not doing so convincingly. So yeah, there was not a lot to love about this book. Even the Pacific Northwest setting did not happen for me, and it was like trying so hard to be like grungy. They talk about how like everyone listened to Nirvana and Soundgarden, which the author spelt wrong, so that shows me he doesn't really know what he's talking about. Also, the main character has bipolar disorder, so I thought, oh, this could be a good chance to learn more about that. But no, all he did was come up with some metaphors. So like the sickness is like the feeling of tar going through your veins and this bird that is looking at you. So that's really all he used to describe the mental illness, were these metaphors over and over again. So really nothing about this book worked for me. Read at your own peril. I literally finished this book, closed the last page, and said, ew. So that about sums it all up. The next book I read was a Russian classic that has been on my list for a long time, and that was Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev. This was a book that created quite a controversy when it came out in the 1860s, since the central character is a nihilist. So Bazarov is this guy who really questions everything about society and the power structures in place. So when you're reading this as a contemporary reader, there's nothing that's really very shocking about his character or opinions, but I guess at the time he was pretty radical. And I thought the weirdest thing about this book is, like, I thought that I would identify with the young edgy nihilists, but it was actually like the older generation and the parents in this book that I felt really connected to. So I was kind of having this crisis while reading this. It's like, oh my gosh, am I an old man now? Like, has that happened? Because the old people in this book, they just go through so much heartbreak when their children just ridicule their way of life and they just leave them alone and they don't care about the relationship as much. So it hurt me in a lot of ways. And they also make fun of the old people for their attachments to things like art, music, and nature, which are all things that I love. So I guess, according to the nihilists of the 1860s, I'm just a ridiculous, irrelevant old person. But yeah, that was kind of my surprising takeaway from this book. But it is a very slim book, but also seems very lofty and weighty in subject matter, like most good Russian classics do. So I really enjoyed reading this one, and I would definitely recommend. I decided to read another Russian book, The Slinks by Tatyana Tolstaya, and this was another book that I was really looking forward to reading that did not let me down. I really loved this. I'd been putting it off for a while because I knew that it was this kind of post-apocalyptic dystopian book, and dystopians I find can be very monotonous since the characters are living such miserable lives. But April was such a gloomy and cold month. Like, we had our only snow day of the year in April that I just felt like now is the right time to go into this dark headspace. And I was really surprised that this was actually not monotonous at all. There is so much personality and humor in this dystopian tale, which you do not always find. So I really enjoyed it. It's set in Russian society after this event called the Blast, which we can imagine is some kind of nuclear apocalypse. And society is rebuilding itself. There are a few people called old-timers that have survived and were people that lived before the time of the blast, so they have all these memories about what life was, the way that our society was structured, and they just kind of have to shake their heads and see how stupid people are in this new version of society, where people do things like read books, but they don't really comprehend or understand them because they don't have a good understanding of culture, which was really fascinating. So it made me think, like, how much of a book are we picking up from just the letters on the page versus how much do we bring into a book based on our understanding of our own cultures and ideas. The love of literature plays a pretty central role in this text, and that's basically our main character's quest becomes not just a quest to rise above his pathetic station in life, but he also just wants to access more books and more knowledge, even though he doesn't always have the tools to understand the things that he's reading. But what I also loved about this book was that it was just really funny in a lot of ways, especially describing this kind of wretched society that these peasants are living in. There was one section of the book that really had me in stitches that I will share with you. Hopefully you have a weird sense of humor like I do. So he was basically getting in a fight with one of the old-timers, you know, who lived in a more dignified civilization. And he's talking about some of the games that they like to play at parties and how they like to laugh at people getting hurt. So here's a description of one of the games. Leapfrog is a good game, lots of fun. It goes like this. We put out the candles so it's dark. You sit or stand wherever you want, and then one guy gets up on the stove. He sits there, and then bam, he jumps down and with an ear-splitting yell. If he lands on one of the guests, he'll always knock him over, give him a bruising or pull an arm out of joint or something. If he misses, then he'll hurt himself, his head or his knee or elbow, or maybe he'll break a rib. The stove is high. Then you light the candles and take a look at the damage. There's even more laughter then. Just a few minutes ago, Zinovy had an eye. Now he doesn't. Gurion over there broke an arm. It's hanging down like a loose strap. What kind of work can he do now? We also play Smothers, and that's fun too. You stuff a pillow in someone's face and smother him, and he flails and splutters, and when he gets away, he's all red and sweaty, and his hair sticking out like a harpy's. people rarely die. Tolstaya did a great job of creating a new form of human civilization that plays by different rules, so it's a lot of fun comparing how these people are different, and yet what ways are they still the same? What are features of humanity that we are just never going to be able to shake? There were moments of comedy and also tragedy in this book. There really were some touching episodes, so I really loved the Slinks. I'm so glad I picked it up. The last few things I have to talk about are all graphic novels. One that I read over the course of one weekend was Black Hole by Charles Burns. This actually had a strange similarity with the Slinks in that they both feature characters that have tails, which I can't say happens in most of the other books that I read, but that was a little shared similarity that they had. Black Hole is set in the Pacific Northwest, and it's about this group of young people, and strange things are happening. There's some kind of weird virus that's being passed around through sex. So of course you kind of have those parallels to AIDS and STDs, but really I thought that this was just a book about teenagers and what it's like to not fit in and to be judged by your peers and feeling like an outsider. I kind of took away that was the main message of this book. It's really creepy. The artwork is pretty cool. It's all done in black and white. And I found that this book, I read it in 2 sittings, all in the middle of the night, which was really the right headspace to be in, because it is kind of like creepy and surreal at times. So between that midnight to 4 a.m. zone was a good time to read the story in just large chunks at a time. So I did get into the story. I could see how people would find it to not be satisfying because there isn't really any kind of resolution, but I kind of enjoyed just living in this strange world for a time. One thing I noticed is that it is supposedly about teenagers, and yet everyone here has this like great body and they all look like adults, but I can honestly say that I did not mind that flaw, because you really do not want to see naked, realistic looking teenagers, right? That would just be uncomfortable, so I can forgive Burns for that flaw. The other graphic novel that I read this month was called Never Goodbye by Coco Moodyson, and this book, I can say, was the complete opposite. These were all just really like tragic and unfortunate looking adolescents, so it was a very different take on this turbulent time of people's lives. I picked this book up because I had seen the film based on it, We Are the Best. It's just basically about this trio of misfits, kind of like Black Hole, right? They don't really fit in, they just do their own thing. They are just these hardcore punk rock chicks that are looking to start a band. So it's a cute story, and I feel like nothing really amazing happens in it. Like, I don't know if I'd recommend it for everyone because there's not a lot of plot, but I just think it's cute. I was kind of a weird punk rock chick when I was 12 too, so I just relate to the story, and it's kind of nice to see this female friendship. So if you're a weirdo like me, you might like it, but there really isn't a lot of plot happening in this book. And finally, I started reading Saga by Brian K. Vaughn and Fiona Staples. This is kind of the action fantasy series that literally everyone seems to be reading, so I thought, why not me? And I have to say, I really did enjoy the first volume. It was really fun and easy to flip through the pages. I loved the artwork, and the story is compelling, so I will be continuing on with this series. My absolute favorite character in this only had an appearance in one panel. There was this really adorable alligator butler. He was so polite and cute. I really loved him, but he didn't come back in the story. So like, I hope that he is going to appear again, because he was kind of my favorite thing that happened. But there were a lot of other exciting things that happened as well. So I am looking forward to continuing on with the journey here and to see where this story is going to go. So those were all the books that I read in April. It was a pretty fun reading month, all things considered. We're already over halfway through May, so there are a few more books that I have read that I want to talk about, but I guess I will try to hold back and save it for my May wrap-up, which might appear in 2 weeks if I can get my life back on track and film at a regular schedule. Anyway, thank you so much for stopping by. Please let me know what you've been busy reading these days, and I will see you again soon.